Hey everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub on our normal time Wednesday afternoon or Wednesday evening if you're like Vlad and are over in Europe. We are continuing our conversation talking about all about software in manufacturing. Very excited to have Chris on here, and we'll get a bit into the maintenance side of software, which is an interesting kind of aspect, an interesting angle that we have not really talked a ton about in the past, despite the fact that Vlad and I have spent years of our combined lives working on these different platforms and these different pieces of software. So super excited to get into that. First, if you guys are new here, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you guys are new here, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. I'm Dave. This guy is Vlad. We like to have fun conversations. Every month we pick a different topic that we call a theme. This month we're talking all about software in manufacturing. And our goal is to put 4 conversations around it so that if you know a little bit, you have a better idea of it. And if you know a lot about it, hopefully we get you some interesting, fun tidbits to go take back to the rest of your life. But without further ado, everyone officially welcome to Manufacturing Hub. Again, this is episode 172. We'd like to welcome Chris Hutson from MaintainX on the show. Chris, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dave and Vlad, and I appreciate you inviting me onto the podcast. I'm excited to do some benchmarking with you and your audience and maybe a little collaborative knowledge sharing. And then certainly, as you pointed out, get into a little deeper dive on the manufacturing software tech stack.
Awesome. I think it's going to be a really good conversation, Chris. That being said, before we maybe dive into maintenance and software, could you give us a little bit of an introduction of yourself? Tell us about how did you get started in manufacturing? What was your career progression like, and ultimately what you are doing today?
Yeah. I'll start from the back and work my way up. What I'm doing today, I'm the Director of Lifecycle and Manufacturing Solutions for MaintainX, and we'll talk later about how that transpired. It's an interesting story, but ultimately the marketing folks will maybe be delighted because I'm going to double down on a simpler message in the rule of threes here. So my background really spans in 3 decades in industry and manufacturing, working for some great companies, predominantly 3 companies. And one of those companies changed their name several times through growth and acquisition. Ultimately, 3 areas of responsibility in that time. Certainly, manufacturing. Starting out as a manufacturing engineer, working my way up to in many roles from initial pre-order and applications engineering, engineering, full supply chain, production, all the way to commissioning, and then aftermarket support. So the second part of that career was moving into and helping 2 companies stand up a very customer based aftermarket lifecycle support team, which will include parts and services like field service, technical support, customer training. And then, because both of those companies had large install base, over 4,500 clients, ultimately I was able to visit and spend time in over 100 facilities in my career and learn a lot from customers as part of that affinity to try to understand their needs and develop solutions for improvement, which leads me to the third area and last, which is ultimately always focused on enhancing asset performance and system optimization.
I honestly, I really like that. The comment I will make is I think our industry certainly needs, not necessarily, I want to say a lot more, but I think the customer success angle is extremely important because at the end of the day, we're not a digital space, right? We are putting out widgets or, product at the end of the production line. So I think it's extremely important for vendors of software or even hardware to put their feet on the ground, be able to understand what manufacturers are going through, and ultimately understand, at a very deep level, not only the process, but also, as we're going to get into this, maybe the maintenance cycles and how that operates, and also the people tied into the process. as they, I guess, talk to the customer. So I certainly appreciate that. Could you give us maybe a bit more details about your current role? So I don't want to make the assumption that everyone understands what lifecycle management is. So maybe what is the general day-to-day? Maybe what's the expectation in that role, and what are you ultimately doing with MaintainX?
Yeah, so I spend my time in two main buckets. One is really spending time with our clients and understanding where they are in the journey around, digital transformation, using MaintainX as a catalyst for that journey, helping them define their roadmap and really trying to provide tools to simplify that transition. So
Mhm.
working with our solutioning teams and applying my years of manufacturing experience and direct use of these type of systems, because I've worked in all systems over the years, from manufacturing PLC edge device
Mhm.
and sensors, through SCADA, MES, ERP, and all the way up to some more current cloud solutions. The other part of my role is really in terms of product lifecycle, working with our product teams that are very focused on, again, developing solutions that our customers are requesting. And
Mhm.
so staying sticky with that product team and developing some really new and exciting platforms within our current software.
Mhm. Let me ask you, I guess, before I pass the metaphorical mic to Dave, a question. I guess, what do you, if you take a step back, right, and look at our industry, because you've mentioned a lot of, I want to say, like, layers of that metaphorical stack. What do you see as maybe the biggest challenges that end users are facing when it comes to digital transformation, right? Which I think in its own is maybe a very, like, encompassing term, but where do you see the greatest challenges, and maybe also the biggest opportunities in today's industry?
Yeah, I think the challenges are, it's fairly ambiguous in terms of what is digital transformation, and more importantly, what does it mean to each use case in the manufacturing application. So I think defining an effective project charter. What we're doing is also enabling experts in the field and our third party solution providers to ensure there's plenty of bandwidth and expertise, proven expertise, to start small and then to develop that journey and the ultimate roadmap. I think so that's the biggest challenge. The scope and expectation around outcomes. There are lots of leadership expectations around cost savings, increasing capacity, providing better visualization of data. So, again, I just always advocate. My personal journey was to work with our teams in a green light thinking to identify. We had over 1,000 assets in the plant that I was, responsible for here in the Midwest, and with those thousands of assets, hundreds of people working, 24/7. And what you want to understand is, identify the Pareto, the critical assets, and maybe
Mhm.
that 10 or 15%, then determine, what are the failure modes in those assets? Why are they constraints? And come up with a small solution to start enunciating that data and
Mhm.
ensure that it can be internalized and acted on. So I was able to, with MaintainX, that platform, and there's others out there, to ensure that the ecosystem within your manufacturing stack is connected and that there is a progression, so that, if you look at the data, there is a large percentage, over 60% of the manufacturers fail to really implement effectively.
Mhm. I have so many more questions, but look, I'll pass it to Dave. I'm very curious on the data side, right? Because I've done some work there, and I'm familiar, I guess, with what's going on there. But look, Dave, what are your thoughts?
Absolutely. No, no. Thank you so much for that, Chris. Vlad, thank you for letting me jump in. As Chris, as you and I were having the discussion beforehand, You told me a really compelling story as to you came to work for MaintainX because you were looking for a CMMS, a solution to a problem that you had, and you found MaintainX, and now here you are going and helping work with a variety of different groups to go implement and go make sure it's supported, not just during the sale, but also after the sale, so we can hit all these metrics and KPIs. Can you tell the listeners a little bit more of that story of how you found MaintainX, maybe some of your first thoughts of that? And then I also do want to make sure we get into some of the other things that you brought up. But I feel like it's a really compelling story. So if you wouldn't mind getting into it a little bit more, please.
Yeah, sure. It's an interesting closed loop story. If you can't beat them, join them. So about 5 years ago, I was responsible, fortunately, with a seven-figure contract, always customer facing, right? An active project to provide an integrated lifecycle management solution. So the company I was at as a system integrator built very complex, designed, engineered, manufactured, and commissioned complex systems in 60 different countries. And what we found is a lot of clients were unable to maintain and sustain the V curve, right? The
Mhm.
production output that's desired in that CapEx justification of those complex systems. So we provided a lifecycle management solution encompassed with resident operations and maintenance of those complex systems, and all the parts and services that go with managing and monitoring. So I searched for a mobile first CMMS or enterprise asset management solution because it was imperative that our teams that were in the field doing this work, um, in many cases, they were offline. So they needed a mobile first, very simplistic user interface, and really focused on that frontline team because is often stated 80% of the frontline workforce is mobile, right? They're not static behind a desk like many of us. We're using our mobile devices and apps as key tools in doing our work. So I was able to, with some other requirements for integrating into the SCADA and the ERP system, trial and really be delighted with MaintainX to the point where after using it as a super user for 4 years, I joined the team. And joining the team means to continue carrying that torch in a role where I can contribute and innovate with product solutions and workflows for manufacturers.
If I can, Dave, just
Mhm.
a short like side note, Chris, can we define what a CMMS is, and I guess like give some
Yeah,
tangible maybe examples, because I don't want to make the assumption that all of our
right.
listeners are familiar with the maintenance side and what it is, right?
Yeah, certainly. Try not to do too much acronym speak, but a computerized maintenance management system is really a legacy term. Early on in my manufacturing engineering and then my maintenance management days, I actually built my first CMMS, computerized maintenance management system myself because I couldn't get funding for it. So I inherited a maintenance organization because I was implementing capex projects as a manufacturing engineer, and we were doing such a good job with this technology that it became fairly maintenance intensive, just like today's technology is. And as part of that team, a basic function of a CMMS or an enterprise asset management, which gets into a little more advanced features, is to do task scheduling and work execution to maintain assets, right? And to ultimately, hopefully, improve and optimize their performance. So it's work order, scheduling, and execution. It's making sure that total cost of ownership of an asset, so both labor and materials, parts and consumables, are charged out and to those assets, so you have full visibility of the total cost of an asset. And then there's other functionality in terms of the integrations, and ultimately in MaintainX, one of the strong features is its communication and messaging system where voice activated AI text can be done at the point of work. So that's I think the basic functionality.
Absolutely. So I love that, Chris. Thank you for that. I want to ask why maintenance was the solution the team at MaintainX decided to go after. I imagine it wasn't they picked the name and then built the solution. But before I want to do that, I think you brought up an interesting point of mobile first, right? You said that you were looking for a mobile first solution. Can you tell us why you were looking for a mobile first solution, maybe how that was implemented during your 4 or 5 years using it, and maybe the feedback that you guys get from customers? And I will say that's from the lens of all longtime listeners know that I love mobile first solutions because people just intuitively seem to know how that know how to go use things on their cell phone. But I'd love to get your perspective on it as well, please.
Yeah, there's, if you look out into the landscape, um, there are software products that are with a wrapper um, transition into a mobile app. And I think there's a significant difference when you look at those of those that are built on a mobile first platform, right? And so we're a cloud-based solution in AWS with a 99.9% service level, and the ability to I always in my experience in implementing MaintainX, it was very sensitive to technicians that had spent 20, 25 years in a clipboard and paper environment. And what happens in that case is, the scheduling is clunky, and so, but they're a little bit intimidated. But I always use the adage when it's a mobile platform, it's, do you have a cell phone? Have you ever used your banking app? Do you text friends and family? And if you can do that literally within hours, you're using a platform like MaintainX intuitively to execute work.
I will make the comment again, Chris. I think having worked in maintenance, I can tell you that a lot of facilities are still using pagers, and I think it's a huge opportunity to migrate away from not only that for communication, which is, as you can imagine, for those who are probably too young to know what a pager is, on top of that, from just all the papers that you create for those work orders and try to communicate back and forth with your team. I think it's a problem that exists, but it also is sometimes difficult to see it until you've experienced it, right? So if you're maybe on like the R&D engineering team, you've not necessarily lived through that pain, but it is very much so there. So I certainly see the need of being a lot more digital on that side, and I think maybe other areas other than maintenance sometimes receive a bit more budget depending on obviously the company and the understanding of that team. And sometimes it's simply like unfortunate that they have not deployed better solutions for the team, right? Because, like I said, they benefit a lot from these solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just having digital tools, right? We have an AI solution that literally can scan a several hundred page equipment manual and distill in it the key maintenance procedures that are required and recommended by the OEM in those manuals. To be able to use modern technology to scan a QR code at an asset, and that matrix barcode in the palm of your hand gives you all the spare parts that are listed within that asset. And so
Mhm.
then I can also scan a barcode of that part and add it directly to my work order. So, I had somebody came to me in the maintenance world and asked me, hey Chris, we need a couple more maintenance technicians. All this new equipment, we just are having a hard time keeping everything running and hitting our scheduled PMs. And I was like, well, I understand where you're coming from. Do you have some data that we can bring and try to substantiate that? And no, they really didn't have a lot of data. We did a simple 1 week study that was a spaghetti diagram because I was convinced that there was a lot of non-value added time with our
Mhm.
technicians, not to their fault, but they would, by the time they got a radio con of a problem on the shop floor, they would basically go to the site, assess, and then then try to go find parts. They weren't sure if the parts were in inventory, what potential special tools were needed, coordinate with the manufacturing operations teams. But ultimately, in digitizing that, you can take a picture on the shop floor, put an instant request into maintenance with an annotated picture or video that says very clearly, right, what the issue is. You can scan the parts and tools out on the way to the job site because you can see and know what parts are available. So I think the digital age um, really starts catalyzing a lot of functionality to be more efficient in a maintenance organization.
Let me ask you maybe a follow-up on that thought, right? So when you're having conversations with, I want to say, potential buyers, right, who are not yet sold, maybe on the premise of deploying better software to help them I guess, manage the maintenance operations, if I want to describe it as that, what are maybe the challenges that you see, right? So you've mentioned that sometimes they simply don't have the data, right? So it's very difficult for them to say what they're lacking or what could improve. I would assume maybe there's still some thoughts about the transition towards, like, a more digitalized way of working, right? So the workflow changes a little bit. And then maybe, like, do they not see sometimes the ROI, right? So what kind of maybe challenges do you encounter in those conversations?
Yeah, I think to your point, it's having that real-time access to data. The folks on the production floor, they're trying to solve real-time issues, and by having digital tools at the point of work where they can look at a knowledge base or look at the history of work orders around that equipment, they can ask for AI troubleshooting assistance. Ultimately, to perform their jobs easier. So much work in a paper environment is on hold, waiting for parts, waiting for tools, waiting for access to the equipment, and the digital tools really accelerate, the efficiency around that.
I guess let me do another follow-up. Sorry about that. I guess
Yeah.
when you try to get them to understand the value, and I know, see, this is, I think, like a huge selling point for software versus hardware, right? Because ultimately you can deploy almost a proof of concept at no, well, I guess not at no cost, but a very low cost compared to if you had to deploy, servers and install something extremely massive. Maybe how do you think about getting them to switch their opinion, maybe, or get them to buy into the solution when it comes to these tools?
Yeah, I think, so the messaging function is something that we see and hear a lot from our clients, is allows them to be so much more productive. It's just like using Teams channels maybe in an office environment where you can enlist support. You have targeted notifications to those teams and or like an escalation or a safety or an electrical team. So I think the messaging functionality allows them to feel like they're not kind of on an island by themselves. And then, in terms of asset health, their predominant role is to maintain a level of OEE, right? Overall equipment effectiveness in their
Yep.
plant and operation. So to be able to really understand and see firsthand a Pareto analysis of those assets that are the most problematic in your operation, and then because you've built failure mode analysis around that, you've defined some of those failure modes, and you're able to really mitigate risk around the performance of those assets. And ultimately it's job enrichment, because now maintenance, as you know then, Vlad, is you have a lot of people complaining and there's a lot of firefighting in the heat of the moment. So to have these advanced tools to allow you to improve the performance of your production systems and assets and to work more effectively is, one thing that in this theory of change management is it resonates with the maintenance techs.
Absolutely. Dave, thoughts?
I'm just sitting here having like traumatic flashbacks to previous projects and times in my life. But no, there's absolutely a lot of wasted time. As Chris was saying, for maintenance, for the entire maintenance department, not having the right tools, not having the right parts, not knowing if you have the right parts, not trusting the system that has the list of parts as to if a part's in stock or not, and if someone has to go try to run to get it from a sister facility or from the hardware store or whatever it is down the street. Absolutely. Absolutely a very compelling story that I feel all too many of us live day in, day out, and so many facilities struggle to get the opposite side of that V curve, as Chris said, because of this. Do want to thank Greg. Greg in the comments is saying the best outcomes come when you get to work with someone who has done your job, been through the process, and found a solution that delivers the right outcome. I would absolutely agree, Greg. I think my comment to Chris is you hear about some people who have gone through the process that Chris has gone through, but not nearly enough. But I would say everyone I know who has gone through the process of finding the solution, becoming the super user, and then making the transition, as Chris have, are some of the most vocal proponents of the software because they know the software in and out, and they absolutely love the software and tools. Chris, I want to go transition the conversation kind of past the point of we've selected the piece of software, right? So I would hope that everyone currently listening to what we're talking about agrees that there needs to be some sort of digital solution for the maintenance folks. Hopefully, some sort of mobile first digital solution with QR codes and like solid solid 2020 2021 technology for people who are maybe still be on pagers, as Vlad said. But I want to talk about the aftermarket side of the support. And I guess, can you walk us through from your perspective, either how you work with organizations on the aftermarket side, or maybe best case scenario, best learnings from you, please?
Yeah, so you're asking about post sale
Mhm.
in the software. So similar to aftermarket or life cycle performance support and a machine equipment environment, it's to really, stay close to your customers, right? To understand where they are in the journey. And I think it's ensuring that you have a good customer success team that is syncing with your clients, that you've established a very clear project charter, because we advocate, and my experience is to have a phased plan of implementation, particularly if you're an enterprise with multiple locations. So to meet and regularly discuss where you are on that project journey. um, Customer training, it's difficult. Everybody trains ahead of a project, and then it's more around, once you view something, you have a better understanding of what are the things that we need to really reemphasize and train for successful outcomes. So part of that project charter too should be very clear on what's in it for me, that WIFM, and align to the organization as well on the expected outcomes of any technology such as software implementation.
I will say, Chris, look, once again, I've how to say it, I've lived through projects where there wasn't enough emphasis, I think, of post sales customer support. And at the end of the day, I think a lot of these projects are a journey rather than a switch, right? So even though it is software, I think it involves a lot of change management, which is, I would say, almost a science in itself. And it's not a one size fits all solution, right? So what I mean by that is you cannot simply assume just because a specific site or a specific culture has adopted the tool by, let's call it, you training the supervisor, and then it kind of permeated to operators, that's necessarily going to be the same model. So you really need to set the right, I want to say, like, trainings for the champions, understand what the operators are struggling with. So I definitely resonate with that approach, and I think it's great that you guys are thinking beyond just the technology, right? Because at the end of the day, there's what's the pyramid: process, people, technology, and I think the people aspect is even more important than the tools, and at least that's my opinion. So I like the fact that you resonate with that, and yeah, just again, maybe like more curious what your perspective is there. Like, how are you connecting and sort of educating the people on how to do things better? Any interesting maybe stories even from the field on what has worked that was surprising, or vice versa, maybe what hasn't worked and was a learning point? So curious if you have any stories from there.
Yeah, I think we've all lived through some pain on software implementations, and many of those are behemoth, like an ERP put up. Right, I've been through and been on a cross-functional team for I think 4 times now in my career, all different top, tier one software solutions, and they touch every aspect of your business and every one. So the change management, I do appreciate. I've learned in the last few implementations to enlist some third party change management experts. One, it's sort of a neutral voice where they're very aligned with the desired outcomes and the technology the software brings, and the breakthrough type potential, but allowing them to really communicate with the teams and send out, I think as we get into a project, and project managing many different things in my life and career, it's sometimes that communication pillar of project management we don't always come back to and ensure that everyone, all stakeholders, are invested. So the stories are, I think, start with a solid cross-functional team, and make sure that those subject matter experts really have kind of the BPO mentality, which is that business process ownership, so that, whatever type of contingency plans and events that occur, because they will in an implementation, it's just ensure that you're coming back and those subject matter experts are reaching out to their teams. I think there's, I don't want to get into horror stories, but one I always recommend is I've implemented a lot of capital projects in my career, both machinery, technology, um, and software. And there's not too many people in the leadership team when you go to with a capex form, a business case justification for new sexy technology, a new fiber laser, a new robotic system. Everyone can clearly see, and you've probably already run the results that says it's going to process 30% faster. It's going to be this percent enhance our safety.
Mhm.
Quality is going to increase by 15%. We're going to reduce energy. Those are all quantitative. When it comes to software, you build your justification, but a lot of leaders, when you come to them with a software project, will really cringe, because their experience has been, many of them are over budget, they under deliver, and unfortunately take longer than planned. So I
Mhm.
think it's really start with a strong project charter, a really good cross-functional team, and a clear schedule for implementation on that phase journey.
Let me ask you a little bit, one last thought before I pass it over to Dave. Maybe when you say cross-functional team, right? Could you elaborate on that a little bit, right? Have you seen, obviously, like plant managers are probably going to be involved, someone on the maintenance side. Does it also require some IT involvement, right? Because again, we're
Sure.
talking about deploying across devices that are not maybe currently part of the, let's say, the company. If it's a personal phone, then there's all kinds of like IT/cybersecurity questions as well. So who would make up the ideal, let's call it, cross-functional team for these types of deployments?
Yeah, you've mentioned the key stakeholders. I think not just operations, but IT and OT, right? The operational excellence or continuous improvement teams, because they have a lot at stake here in terms of the payback of software and the technology. It really, that cross-functional team should go through all phases of your business. So I think it's first always starting with that clear project charter that will help you define who's impacted. A lot of people use that. I'm a lean disciple. I use that term A3, which is a lean document that's very well thought out of in terms of what's the problem you're solving, who's impacted, what's the current state, future state. So I think in that assessment, you should be able to identify who the key stakeholders. So this goes back to your pain point in software implementations. You build out a schedule, and a lot of companies self-perform some aspects of
Mhm.
implementation, and I would really caution against not overcommitting there, because most companies sign up for some internal resources, and my experience has been, even though it's been really clear in a Gantt chart and definition of resource and responsibility, and in like a RACIC, right, a responsibility accountability diagram, that a lot of times those internal resources get consumed with other tasks and they're not
Mhm.
available. So I'd always have a contingency for resource.
Gotcha.
Absolutely. A funny story to internal resources, Chris. I was just working on a project where we were promised 3 internal resources, and 4.5 days later, when we showed up on site, we had somehow managed to lose 2 2/3 of those resources. Just poof, gone, seemingly instantly from the project. So I feel like internal resources, while always a great idea, sometimes when we build some of these larger projects, we don't necessarily think about the fact that they already have full-time jobs, or assumably already have full-time jobs, unless they are very much kind of project specific focused. I think that's a really good point. And then just from your perspective, I'd imagine groups who do project charters know what project charters look like. But I've worked with too many groups who maybe gloss over the project charter phase. So maybe a short explanation of what you see good project charters look like, and maybe a couple of suggestions for groups who might not spend as much time doing those on the front end as they should, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, and they can, depending on the solution set, like a full ERP system, they can
Hmm.
be very complex. But ultimately, you're trying to. The first step is define a problem, right? What is it
Hmm.
we're solving, and and based on that, before you can really put a full solution in play, you should go back and ensure there's strong documentation of your process in terms of current state. And a lot of times, where can you standardize across multiple locations
Hmm.
in those current processes? Many companies have that through their quality management system if they're ISO certified, but those processes should have a value stream map, right? They should
Hmm.
clearly articulate what the current state is, and then the future state of what this software solution will provide in that value stream map, which will then, allow you to build a justification on what's the payback for this system, and of course, and then develop a schedule that's realistic. So the project charters and an A3 process and lean can really get into a lot of cause and effect diagramming. So it really depends on how complex the system is.
Hmm. Absolutely. No, thank you for that. I do love the A3 kind of project overview documents. I will say I'm not sure I've ever seen a fairly straightforward document be so misunderstood by such a large portion of people who want to go use it than I have on the variety of the A3 and some of those lean tools. But I agree. If there's someone who actually knows how to go use those tools, they're a really good outline in order to go through the process of starting. Chris, I want to
Yeah,
talk about a dot. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add two things that people overlook, and I learned this
Mhm.
early on as a manufacturing engineer, and it's always simplify before you automate, right? So
Yes.
distill down to the very simple elements of a process. What are your inputs? What are your outputs? And that value stream. What's the customer willing to pay for? And then I think it's developing a SWOT. What are your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats,
Mhm.
and ensure that you do a gap assessment around that analysis.
Absolutely. No, I would agree with that. And as we were preparing for this, we were talking about a whole bunch of reasons why software is hard to implement, and maybe we can go kind of continue down that path of what we were talking about. Of what I guess one, why software is hard to implement, but ideally how people can go mitigate some of those risks, because I feel best case scenario, I guess all of us need to go implement pieces of software and pieces of technology. in our everyday lives and in our businesses. And so there is always some amount of inherent risk, and success is never 100% guaranteed unless you're a really good organization who has done this a whole bunch of times before and just maybe move from one group to the next. So, can you give us maybe some of your thoughts about, how, I guess, both how software is hard to implement, but also how you go through the process and work with groups to help mitigate some of those risks, please?
Yeah, and I think kind of taking off from that gap assessment, you'll come up with some identified vulnerabilities
Hmm.
and ensure that, in your testing phase, in your phased project plan, there definitely should be a testing phase. Um, what I think happens in a lot of cases is data integrity, right? Everybody's into master data management,
Hmm.
and particularly again for those large enterprises that have multiple locations. It goes back to the basic premise of an ERP is the source of truth for example, like your parts item masters. You shouldn't have a part number with a part with 20 different part numbers across all your organizations. But it's going back and really doing that data management, that scrubbing that needs to occur to have a starting out, so you don't have the GIGO, the garbage in, garbage out syndrome in your project.
Mhm.
Um, I think the enlisting partners, right? It's always good to have a perspective around people in the industry to validate and provide feedback or a sounding board on your project and where you are in the implementation.
Chris, I did want to ask maybe as a follow-up to that is, how do you figure out the right features to build? Because I think one of the challenges also in software, to continue on that same train of thought, is, obviously not only to provide value what you currently have, but what can you build in order to help, I guess, the largest customer base possible that you have. And you mentioned, a couple of things, and we can dissect those as well, which I thought was very interesting, right? Is using, let's say, like AI to parse manuals, or being able to
Hmm.
capture like images or video, I guess, of a document in order to ingest that and then make it easier to utilize in a certain specific way. So I guess, like, how do you think of, these newer technologies maybe, but what's going to add value to the actual customer versus, it's just maybe a nice to have or something that is maybe a little bit too early for adoption? Because I think it's also, and bringing this back maybe to the earlier conversation, if I'm using pagers, everyone, well, we should get a walkie-talkie, right? And that's also kind of like, like it's maybe not the best approach. So I'm curious maybe what the process is for figuring out the product.
Yeah, I think from an AI perspective, it's again, start small. What are some, significant efficiencies that you can have based on your current labor situation? A lot of people are dealing with workforce shortages. I use the earlier example where being able to digitize through AI reams of equipment manuals, spare parts lists,
Hmm.
technical documentation, OEM recommended PM procedures. So to
Mhm.
be able to ingest that into an AI tool and provide
Hmm.
that as we do into a sort of an easy button to for something that might take a manufacturing operation, weeks or months to digitize all of that documentation so that it's ingestible. So I think start small. Simple tools like a feature that we have is anomaly detection. We have all these data points, whether it's through sensors or manual meters or integrations, and those data points, like everybody's wanting to point to right now, and that's how do we use AI to improve asset health? And that is to be able to look at considerable amounts of machine data and failure modes and literally predict failure points, right? That's the predictive and then prescriptive maintenance tools that AI brings. I think there is a yeah, and to me, it's really try to not have it be over all-encompassing. It's to start small with a couple of key build the wins on that, and then move on to the next hits.
And that's super interesting, right? Because I think, at least my perspective is, and obviously right now I'm not, let's say, in maintenance, but until I would have had this conversation with you, I would not have even considered that to be a current possibility, right? And what I mean by that is there's almost this, how to say, like this portion where you need to educate the potential end users on what is possible and what's available. Because I think, again, and someone mentioned this in the LinkedIn chat, is that user feedback is important. But I think you need to take that with, not necessarily with a grain of salt, but I guess, like I said, you can get feedback that is only within, let's say, the realm of that person's understanding of what is better. But you, as the, let's call it the OEM or a company that's looking to innovate, you need to look maybe beyond what the suggestions are and what the tools are in order to bring something, I guess, more innovative than it otherwise might be if you're just told, like, hey, well, it'd be great if we had radios instead of pages, or it would be great if we had, a PDF scanned document instead of the paper ones, right? Like you need to maybe go a step further. So I definitely appreciate you maybe explaining to us what is possible. And I'm assuming that that's a great deal of your job also, right? To sort of, I don't want to say evangelizing, but explaining what is truly possible with some of these software tools.
And that's really listening to your clients, right? Assessing their needs, where are their pain points, not just broadly applying solution sets that may not be effective for their specific application or use case.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I would say I am so happy to hear someone else say similar things because, Chris, I've been telling Vlad that similar applications are very much what excites me about the ability to leverage AI solutions in and with facilities today. So I don't have to read thousands of pages of documentation when people ask me questions. And so I can immediately spit out the correct answer. So I absolutely like that. I think that is a fantastic. I think that's a fantastic and interesting use case. One of the other things that we had talked about, maybe towards the back end of software implementation, is planning for an ROI audit. Can you tell us maybe a little bit more about ROI audits, how you're using them, or how you're seeing end users using them, and maybe, if we want to get crazy, how they go back and connect to the project charter? Hopefully they're pretty close. But can you tell us what you're seeing and how you're using them, please?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think for mature operations, they have a process, right? We talk about
Mhm.
standardizing, and within that standard work model, I'm sure they probably have an ROI tool. If not, online, we have one that guides our clients through the key ROI factors and being able to justify, a cloud-based software solution. And ultimately, the data that's built into that back-end tool is from survey data of over like 500 clients. So ultimately, an ROI audit says, and this was early on in my career when I was implementing a lot of technology in a manufacturing operation, a lot of capital equipment.
Mm-hmm.
And the CFO of our company was an engineer. So when we sat down and at a board level and decided how the budget was going to look like for the upcoming year, he was pretty intuitive. You couldn't fool him with technology, and he hung on. If you promised a 20% increase in capacity or a 10% improvement in efficiency, or 15 or 20% reduction in downtime, those were things that he took to doing a 6-month ROI audit. So it was a planned event on our project charter and in our schedule to go out and do a 6-month and then an annual assessment of the ROI, that audit. So, if you're effective as you're implementing, that's top of mind for the team during implementation of what the outcomes are, but then you're also collecting the data to ensure that you're realizing the gain.
I like that. I guess I get to ask the follow-up question. So I like that, Chris. let me ask, when you guys were going through these ROI audits with your CEO that is an engineer, I assume that there are other things that may cause added downtime or maybe unforeseen complications or dependencies. Were those kind of laid out? What was it? This is kind of what we were expecting, and we see that there might have been some trouble here, or was it we promised 5% or 15%, and we've only reached we've reached less than that? How did that go? Because I feel like it could go either of two ways, and
Yeah,
both could potentially be good learning opportunities.
that's really good. Certainly all CapEx justifications have some assumptions. But my recommendation, and through products like ours, you're able to capture real-time data, whether that's through inspection or connected systems. And so when you see things that impact, and we're charting those failure modes, and you can then clearly say, hey, a real world situation that we've all felt is supply chain dysfunction. So there was a material shortage, and ultimately the machine wasn't available because the raw material wasn't on hand. So that's one of your fault codes, right? Most people are documenting work stoppages, changeovers. So if there's something that's impacting that asset performance or system, then that should be part of your root cause corrective action as you're implementing. So some of those are out of your control. Other things like, hey, we had 4 more changeovers this week than we were expecting. Well, you should probably have methods and continuous improvement activity to be able to make sure that that changeover doesn't impact your performance.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Which, to bring it back maybe to an earlier point that we talked about, is that it is not necessarily the ROI audit is not a single event that happens at a specific timeline. It's more of a, you learn as you go, and you're probably going to encounter certain misses and certain wins, and you're going to not have a surprise at the end of the 6 months, but rather a collection of what has worked, what hasn't worked, and what the plan is for the next 6 months to either correct those issues or to say like, hey, like, this has been great. Maybe we need to add certain, I don't know, features or tools in order to continue on
Yeah.
the same path, right? So it's
Yeah,
a
I mean that's
continuous process, I think. Go ahead.
very much so, and operations are right. That's understanding variability, and in the maintenance world, it's the PF curve, the probability of failure. All equipment's going to degrade over time. It's understanding those failure modes, and what you're describing, Vlad, is to mitigate that risk. I have a funny story. Growing up, I guess there was an affinity for me in maintenance early on in my life because I appreciated my dad was out of his military service. He was a airplane mechanic, a really good one. And he
Mhm.
decided that he didn't know if he wanted to do that the rest of his life. He went to night school and got his aeronautical engineering degree, and then later his master's in engineering. But he ended up in his career being the head of reliability for Defense Aviation's Systems Command for the Apache helicopter, and there are certain
Wow.
events in history that really impacted the reliability of that machine. But when I became a driver at 16, I was fortunate. He let my brother and I share a car, and he said, there's a couple of rules here, and I didn't realize it at the time. It had to do with reliability and maintenance. But one rule was simple: make sure you keep gas in it, and that the car and you are home by midnight. But the other one that now has stuck with me says, I want to make sure that you clean the car once a week. And after doing that for a while, I said, Dad, why is this so important that I keep the car clean? I mean, it looks fine. And he's like, Son, do you not understand the rules around reliability, and that cleaning is inspection, inspection is detection, and detection is correction? So in that cycle, I just I really like a lot of the tools that are out there in the digital space to automate inspection and audit and calibration. It's pretty phenomenal, the technology that's there on conditional based, logic based, if then else inspections, really digitizing a 1 point lesson or a picture story to make it easy for that inspection to collect the right data.
Mhm. And that's an interesting story. I would say, I guess when I was in maintenance, I wish I was explained it that way. I almost, how to say it, learned through trial by fire, and almost saw kind of at least again in the organizations that I've been part of, some of them, right, not all of them, where you almost cut down the maintenance budget until things fail, and then you're a lot more reactive rather than proactive. So I think that when you explain sort of like clean in order to inspect, in order to understand, in order to also, like get some data out of the asset, that makes a lot of sense. And that's certainly what I prescribe to. But like I said, I think the groups maybe don't always understand the value of that data. So they're almost like stuck inside of that, like their own misunderstanding of what is possible when things are running a lot better, when they're using tools, like you mentioned, a couple like 1 point lessons. And I think it's, to bring this back to yet another point you've made earlier, it almost takes an external viewpoint of someone who's been through that in order to bring that to that specific end customer. But I definitely agree with what you're saying. I think it makes a lot of sense, especially tying that back to that story. Dave, thoughts?
Yes, I agree. I think I've told Vlad, but behind the scenes, that every so often I go into a facility and they have all of these issues, maintenance and operations and otherwise. And I want to like put on my Gordon Ramsay hat of a la Kitchen Nightmares and yell at them because everything is just so dirty. And I just want to look at them and like, everything is dirty. Nothing works right because everything is dirty, and you have no idea what are going on with your machines. If we just like took the line down for, I don't know, 3 days and pressure washed everything, I bet we would like almost instantly run 10 to 20% better because we would know a whole lot of things that were going on. So I think that those are some really interesting and very
Yeah.
valid points and lessons that your dad taught you. So
Well,
thank you for.
that's kind of the foundation. One of the foundations of lean is 5S or 6S,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
And establishing a zone map based on the layout of your facility, so there's clear
Mhm.
roles and responsibilities. But within those 5S scorecards, you can gamify those
Mhm.
inspections. And we have a great tool that is a 5S inspection form that's digitized and immediately posts a score and allows the teams to gamify, because when things are competitive and fun,
Mhm.
people are much more likely to get engaged in that process. And it's to your point around cleaning. It's one of the foundations of 5S, and ultimately being able to advance more into lean, Kaizen
Absolutely.
events and other tools.
Absolutely. I would completely agree with that. Chris, this has been an awesome conversation. Before we finish with the last questions we ask everyone, I want to talk a bit about post implementation. There's everything from online service and support to field side training and implementation and kind of beyond. I guess from your experience, from your perspective, what are best rules? What are best use cases in order to help end users get the most out of any piece of software, any tool that they're going to pick?
Yeah, I think it's definitely understand their model around customer support and customer
Hmm.
experience. What are their response times? For us, it's measured in minutes. That they're 24/7 available. That there's ongoing
Hmm.
training, and that could be again like our environment, where there's a community, where there's an academy program for ongoing training. I think it's to ensure that the company is customer centric and always looking at product development and technical refresh that the industry is advocating, not just something that they're pushing. So to me, I think that's and that you're adopting. There's an
Hmm.
adoption plan and a prescribed, quite a forecasted trend around how you should be in adopting that new technology.
Hmm. I agree. I like that, Vlad. Any last thoughts? Any last questions for Chris at the moment?
Chris, let me ask you, since we do have a question which is sort of like predict the future, but I want to maybe reframe that for now in terms of like software, right? So what kind of, and we've talked a little bit about AI, but maybe what kind of tools do you see as like opportunities going into the future when it comes to software? Because again, I think there's a lot of different innovation, whether that's, cloud computing or edge devices, machine learning. There's innovation inside of like vision systems. But what do you feel is maybe interesting and is a big opportunity that end users should be maybe paying more attention to than they used to or than they are today?
Yeah, no, you hit the ones that would be I'd be checking the boxes on. Certainly, I think the convergence of artificial intelligence and machine learning, um, as well as digital twin technologies, right? So the company I worked for prior to my current job was using virtual reality on in construction, based on having that 3D digital twin of an entire system in the field before it was ever installed, and how that can aid. And I think the machine learning, yes. I mean, I go back to, a simple example is like CAD CAM, where it's come from an industry. I remember the days where we would have to redraw flat patterns for like a fiber laser or an NC punch or press brake, and then we got to the point where, well, no, we can do a CAD CAM conversion through a routine in the CAD software so that it already had all those attributes to be processed through a CNC machine. And then we went into something like DriveWorks, where you can build configurables in a standard configurable product. And with those inputs like length, width, speeds, handing, left or right, it will auto draw that assembly, auto draw all the component parts, auto nest it at the shop floor for the laser, and ultimately auto plan based on the demand in your ERP system or MES system. So, that replaced like 5 touch points in the process, and literally save days or weeks in the cycle time. But I think you nailed it. The cloud computing is going to continue to influence those, and make it easier for us to build those data lakes, and we're doing a lot and investing internally and unified namespace, to just be more agile with data and people subscribing to all the different, current disparate systems. The one thing I'd keep an eye on too, and because I spent years with a company that did a lot of robotic automation, but you mentioned
Mhm.
vision systems. We're going from an unprecedented, what used to be, AGVs on tracks, to now mobile robotics with advanced vision and learning systems, and cobots that are just phenomenal, and much more to come on those.
Interesting, interesting. I don't know as much, I guess, in that space. I've certainly worked with robots that move on a track or in like a very specific prescribed path. But yeah, I think it's something to pay. I've seen videos, right? I've seen demos, and we've certainly seen them at Automate. But I think maybe seeing them in a live environment would be very interesting as well. But yeah, appreciate that.
Absolutely. I think that that's really interesting, and I agree. It'll be interesting to see where the technology goes, kind of in all directions, as to if it expands out or maybe if it helps to contract some of the many different styles and types of solutions that we're seeing. Chris, I do want to ask you to predict the future, and I feel like you gave us a really good kind of broad prediction on a variety of things, but maybe ask you to predict the future when we talk about software in manufacturing. Do you imagine that we're going to continue to see a bunch of different kind of pieces of software solutions, and at some point in the future someone's going to pick 5 or 10 and this is their tech stack? Do you imagine that we're going to see some of those condensed down, and so you pick 2 or 3 more platforms? Where do you think, an easy question, right, an easy question
Yep.
towards the end, where do you think that's going to lead our industry in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I think we're seeing already a lot of consolidation in that tech stack, and a lot more agility, with providing real-time data. So more and more investment into, data warehouse, data lake, MQQT type, edge device, because of the cost savings and the ability to have data at the subscribers that need it, which are on the front line.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Chris, we'd like to ask for some career advice. Typically, we want to get your perspective of the best career advice that you can give for someone early to mid career.
That's an interesting question. You know, uh, maybe three things. I think ultimately it's build your base. Whether that's an engineering background, which I was fortunate to achieve, but um, or it's a trade school. I've spent a lot of time really building a farm team model with trade schools because they're ready to hit the workforce. And like engineers, employers like hiring engineers, but people that are coming out of trade school are also problem solvers, right? So I think the second thing is to take a shift in maintenance. I never would have thought in my career when somebody asked me, "Would you like to be the maintenance manager?" They work 24/7. You're going to get calls all night and weekends, and it's going to be the most technically demanding job you've ever had. And so I think that forced problem solving model. Maybe take a shift, not like me, a couple of years in maintenance, but
Mhm.
like a quality auditor, again, maintenance touches all aspects of the business. So you really not only build the network, but you build understanding around the nuts and bolts and the
Mhm.
technology that's important to your company. I guess the third thing is just career learning, right? Covey always said, "Sharpen the saw." So whether that's podcast or just finding ways, reading Audible to find out what are the current trends in your industry, but try to be an expert in an area that's important to your business. And so
Mhm.
it's talk to the people in continuous improvement, maybe, right? And what are the key initiatives that the company is pursuing? Maybe consider getting a green belt if you don't have it. Really use the lean tools that your company is applying, and pick a
Mhm.
project that you can help influence. Industry shows are another example of just staying in tune with current technology. We have a couple coming up. Actually, we'd love to see folks at the booth for IMTS. It's the International Manufacturing Technology Show, starting let's see, September 9th in Chicago, I believe. So
Mhm. Absolutely, Chris. No, I think that entire list was fantastic. I know Vlad and I were both laughing at your comments of go take a shift or go be the maintenance manager. Go be probably top five most stressed person who gets calls all hours of the day and night. Holidays will be a thing of the past. But when you come and you're done with it on the back end, you'll have a lot of very interesting hands-on technical knowledge. And I think that's very maybe undervalued, right? I think lots of times we like the engineering degree, but the engineering degree doesn't necessarily come with a lot of that hands-on knowledge. And I find that lots of the best people to work with are ones that aren't afraid to go get their hands dirty and have some of that hands-on experience. When people are calling you at 3 o'clock in the morning because something is on fire, you're one, hopefully going to remember how to use do not disturb, and two, you're going to go start being very good at answering a lot of these questions very quickly. So awesome, Chris. Thank you so much for that. Next, we always like to ask our guests for a book recommendation. What do you have for us today?
that's a tough one. Again, I have this affinity for anything around lean and
Hmm.
operational excellence. I'm always studying those type of tools. But one that I feel like is practical to our everyday lives. It was a read like 4 years ago, and spent some time with our teams on how to leverage it. Is Measure What Matters by John Doerr. And I think the message that is distilled there is there's so much noise. I mean, you go into manufacturing operations, there's command centers, right? And there's data everywhere, and then we all have dashboards and all these systems that provide just endless amounts of data points. But it's really to talk to your team and do the top down, bottoms up, around what's important, what are the key objectives aligned in the organization, and then more importantly, what are the results? How are you gonna hit those objectives, and make it meaningful, that things people do in their everyday life that they can control. So I think, to me, that was sort of a aha moment to really simplify the messaging and that those OKRs, objectives and key results, they should be visual, right? Any plant I walk in, if it's not really clear in 5 minutes in the plant or a warehouse and distribution operation, what the key metrics are, and I can influence them, right? So I should be able to go up to anybody in the plant and I should say, "Are you winning today?" And if they really don't know what's important and how you determine, it's like sports. We all want to understand how to get over the goal line. So if you don't know if you're winning or not today, hopefully that's visible and simplified in the messaging. And then more importantly, if you're not, what are the cause and effects? What can you do to ensure that you're going to win this week?
Absolutely. I think that I love all of it. Thank you so much for that, Chris. Lots of interesting things to read and think about. Lastly, is how can our listeners help you? Who should reach out? Who should connect? Are you guys looking for more customers? Are you looking to hire? Are you looking to have fun, interesting conversations? Very much kind of us opening it up to how our listeners can help you.
No, I appreciate that. I love these opportunities to benchmark, share knowledge and stories. So I think it's the regular channels. I'm open to participate and share knowledge. It's expanding that network. For us personally, we have a great community channel at MaintainX for those people that want to, hit us for any questions or participate in that community, and appreciate everybody's time.
Absolutely, Chris. Thank you so much for joining. This is another. I feel like every episode this month and lots of our episodes, you look up and we've been here 75 minutes, and it's always an amazing conversation. And Vlad and I are going to arm wrestle in the background for who gets to ask the next 27 questions. But Chris, this has been amazing. Thank you for hanging out with us. Thank you everyone for joining. If you guys are new here, please make sure that you're connected. Well, make sure you're connected with Chris and make sure you're connected with MaintainX. I love what they're doing, and the concepts there. Make sure you're following Manufacturing Hub as well as Vlad and myself. If you're on YouTube or LinkedIn, hit the like, hit the subscribe, do all those buttons. If you guys have managed to make it this far in podcast format, you are awesome. Thank you so much. Rate us 5 stars, like, share, subscribe, all of those things. You'd think I'd have a list of things I should say at this point, Chris, but I absolutely do not.